Hi, I thought that it would be useful for you, given the kind of feedback I got the last time that I talked with you, to share with you some of my thoughts about what has happened this week, certainly in light of Tuesday's election, and where we go from here. And where we go from here is a big, big deal. I first of all obviously want to thank and show my appreciation and to veterans. This is Veterans Day. People who have given so much of their time and risked their lives and limbs for this country. In fact, this is what it's all about, really, fundamentally, this country and the rest of the world. The good news, I guess the thing I want to share with you is that I have gone through, as I'm sure you have, all the stages of shock and denial and grief and anger and everything else that one goes through when somebody dies or when the world is suddenly far worse than you thought it was. And I'm coming to a place now, and I hope that some of you are as well, and as I've talked to grassroots groups and people and activists around the country, I feel that they're coming to the same place where they're feeling energized. They're feeling that what they want to do and what they have to do now is to respond to what has happened in Washington. They've got to respond as best they can. That it is our not only duty and responsibility, but also in our capacity to respond and not let everything that we have worked for disintegrate and die, and not allow vulnerable people to be hurt in this country, and allow the forces that have been unleashed and forces that have been given legitimacy to gain the kind of ground that we fear that they will gain. So this discussion with you today is really about next steps, and it's about where we go, and it's about how we take the energy that is just beginning. This is the beginning of the start. And what I just in terms of temperament, what I do very often is look for silver linings. And I think the silver lining here, honestly, is just that. The people do feel energized. They are not going to give up. They're not going to sort of succumb to cynicism and despair. And I don't want you to either. I really want you to come away from this conversation and many other conversations I'm sure you're having with a feeling not of disempowerment, but a feeling of determination, a feeling of commitment, a feeling that you will work and join with others, and we will all change this. This is not, by the way, I don't look at Tuesday as the victory of hatefulness over decency. I look at it primarily as a repudiation of the power structure of America. I mean, this is, remember Bernie Sanders, remember a year and a half ago that many of the normal power centers of this country, and certainly Washington, New York, the inside politics crowd, the people who were at the top of corporations and Wall Street, they all assumed that Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton would be the candidates. What they didn't foresee is the political revolution that Bernie Sanders created. 22 states won in the Democratic primaries, 47% of the vote, almost all young people. And obviously nobody foresaw Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump really gained ground and was triumphant because he appealed in a fake way to the same sentiments of anger against the establishment, anger against the power structure that really has behaved irresponsibly in terms of widening inequality, turning that wealth into political influence, bending the rules of the game toward their advantage, and rigging it. I think this is all really fundamentally about a game that seems so rigged to so many people, including, I believe, most Trump voters who voted not for hatefulness. They voted to get rid of and shake up that power structure. So in that way, and this is really important, in that way, the Bernie Sanders movement and that aspect of Trumpism that is about shaking up the power structure and making it work for average working people instead of just the people at the top really do have something to do with one another. And our goal and our challenge is to bring together all of the disaffected parts of America, not only the white working class, the blue collar workers, but also African Americans and Latinos, women, everybody who feels right now very vulnerable and have felt for years economically vulnerable. Bring them together in a new coalition. And the question is, as a practical matter, how do we do that? Where do we start? Where do we begin? I can't tell you how many people have written to me or called me over the past 3 days and said, well, I want to do something. Tell me what to do. Where do I start? Now, there have been vigils all over the country. There have been demonstrations all over the country. I think that's great. I do, however, feel that making statements about where we are, making statements about our values, although very important, can't be the end of the road. The Occupy movement, for example, was a wonderful expression of a statement of despair and anger about the status quo, but it was not tied to a strategic political set of ideas and strategies for getting what we wanted. The Tea Party movement, also growing out of the bailout of Wall Street, out of the same sense that the game is rigged, was taken over by the very rich, by the power structure, and that was just as bad, because if you're taken over by the power structure, if you're co-opted, or if you, like the Occupy movement, don't really have a political strategy, ultimately you disappear. So the real question is how to pull together those aspects of America who have been left out, who have been forgotten, who understand that the abuse of power at the top by the powerful and also the privileged, not because they're bad people, but because they have the reins of power and have not done anything to reform the system to make it work for all Americans, that is the challenge, how to do that. Now, yesterday, I talked with some leaders of the Democratic Party, and my question to them was, well, what is going to happen to the Democratic National Committee? To my mind, the Democratic Party has been repudiated. The structure of the Democratic Party has been repudiated. The Democratic National Committee has to be, if it's going to be relevant at all, has got to be completely redone, reinvented. The problem with both the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee, let's be clear here. The power structure is the power structure, and that power structure is very similar, and it overlaps in very important ways. The problem is that both the Republican and Democratic National Committees have been organized around getting big money for elections, and also organized around elections, election to election to election. The Democratic Party is not organized around activism between elections. It's not organized around getting people engaged and helping people know day by day what they can do. Now, I say this because after January 20th, after Donald Trump takes over the federal government and the executive branch of the federal government, and Republicans are in charge of the Senate and the House, after January 20th, there are going to be so many things that we ought to be doing and watching with regard to what happens to the EPA, what happens to Health and Human Services, what moves should we be making with regard to a particular issue that week, that month, that needs a great deal of attention. What pressure should we be putting where? On particular representatives, on particular members of the Senate, on the government itself. Where can we have the most good? What are the pressure points? What are the leverage points? We need an organization, a national organization that is going to help tell us. I mean, I have some ideas, week by week, but I don't trust that I am going to be able to give you that kind of information. We've got to link up grassroots groups all over this country. I've been in touch over the last few days with grassroots groups that have been doing remarkable work for years in Minnesota and in Iowa and elsewhere around the country. These grassroots groups also have to be linked up, because this has got to be now, more than ever, a national movement of people who are determined not to allow the privileged and the powerful to take over our country and do with it what they want. Now, a lot of you were Bernie Sanders supporters, and some of you I know because I've talked to you, you are just saying, well, you know, the Democratic Party got what they deserved. And I knew it and I saw it coming, and Bernie Sanders should have been the candidate. Whenever you get into the should have, the looking backward, I get it. I have many of those feelings. But we also have got to get into the looking forward. What do we do now? What do we do in the future? What do we do between now and January 20th, for example? I personally am going to be working with as many people as I can. People who have some influence, people who share my values and my ideals, to build the kind of organization I'm talking about. And if the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party want to do that, that's great. I want to help them. But if they don't, if they leave a void, then we all have got to be thinking about a different kind of national organization. We all have got to be thinking, maybe even about a third party, but certainly about a group that is able to come together and inform itself and put daily, weekly, the key issues in front of all of our members, and let's call it members, what we need to do that week, that day, who we need to recruit to run for Congress in 2018, who we need to think about with regard to a candidate for president in 2020, who and what we can start doing right now to get change to occur. Now, I know many of you are still in the process of grieving. Many of you still in the process of mourning. And I respect that. And I have been too. And, you know, frankly, I woke up this morning and I thought, oh my God, as many of you woke up this morning. And my most difficult time, I'll tell you frankly, is just in those wee hours when I'm waking up and I suddenly remember what happened Tuesday. And the way I deal with that kind of grief, the way I deal with that kind of mourning, M-O-U-R-N as well as M-O-R-N, the way I do and deal with it is I say, what can I do today? What can I do to make this country work for all of us? What can I do to make America work for the rest of the world? I mean, obviously what happens here has huge impacts and will have huge impacts on the rest of the world. You know, I have children. I have a granddaughter. I care about the future. I've been working at this for the last 50 years. I know how you feel. I know how hard this is for you. I am suggesting that in this process of grieving and mourning, this process of feeling very vulnerable, and I know many of you feel very, very vulnerable. Many of you feel very alone. The answer is to begin the process of coming together and remaking the country and reclaiming it. Or to put it all together, what I'm saying is that the silver lining here is that this is the largest invitation and demand for activism in our lifetimes. We no longer have the choice of whether to be politically engaged. We are going to be politically engaged. And finally, let me just say this. Some of you want to retreat into your communities, and some of you want to retreat into cynicism, and I get that. I get that entirely. I've talked to a number of you who basically say back to me, what good is it? I'm exhausted. I'm angry. But let me just ask you not to retreat into cynicism. If you want to work in your community, that's fine. That's good. That's necessary. But not cynicism. I think working close to home, working in your neighborhoods, working with your friends, working with others, and then branching out and connecting with other communities and working to build this national movement is the ultimate ultimate goal. But work wherever you feel comfortable. Work wherever you feel it is meaningful. Rebuild this country. Make it work for everyone. Now I'm going to take a few of your questions, and then I'm going to end. I wanted to just talk to you before the weekend because I just felt so many of you were contacting me. I wanted to give you something to think about a little bit over the weekend. So let me, we have a few of your questions right here. First one is from Connie Fair. If this was a repudiation of the establishment, why did so many establishment House and Senate candidates get reelected? Connie, I think they got reelected because a lot of people saw, they simply go down the ballot. I mean, they were already there on the ballot. Donald Trump was there on the ballot, and obviously, they just do what people do in terms of running down the ballot. Same thing with Hillary Clinton on the ballot. They just filled in the boxes. A lot of people didn't have alternatives. I think that's what we're talking about, Connie. It's giving people for 2018, for 2020, for 2022, for 2024, real alternatives and rebuilding the sense that there is an alternative here. Next question. Nick Jordan, does this election make you think we should eliminate the Electoral College? Nick, I have been trying for some time, as I know many of you have, particularly after 2020, after the debacle of 2020, to get rid of the Electoral College. There is a national organization with regard to the national vote, and I'll post it on this Facebook page, more details, whose goal is to get every state legislature to agree that it will be bound and it will send all its electors in the direction of the person who wins the popular vote. I think that is a very important next stage and next step. Nick, you also ask, can we lobby them, that is the Electoral College, prior to their December 18th meeting to vote someone else into office? In other words, can we take advantage of the fact we still have an Electoral College and take advantage of the fact that they must have some utility, at least in the minds of the framers of the Constitution, and get them not to put in Donald Trump? A lot of you have suggested that. My feeling about that, honestly, is that is a slippery slope. Because once we get the Electoral College, once the Electoral College really doesn't do what it is supposed to be doing, then who knows what it would do next time. I think the safest way to go, honestly, is to abolish the Electoral College. Next question is from Rodney Wood. Is this what the revolution looks like? Rodney, if what we're talking about is Bernie Sanders type of political revolution, yes, I think this is the beginning of the political revolution. If what you're talking about is manning the barricades and something that is violent, no. I think every or any temptation any one of us has to move into anything other than peaceful resistance would be wrong. It would be counterproductive. It would give President Trump a justification for real repression. What my suggestion is we certainly have a resistance movement, but it's a peaceful resistance movement. And it's not just resistance, it's also building for the future. Next question. Melody Chang. I will work in my community, but why should I ever again pay attention to national politics? Melody, I get it. I understand. I think it's perfectly appropriate and it is wise to work in your community, to help your community. There are a lot of people right now who I know in my community here. Yesterday I talked to a number of students who came to the United States when they were 3 months old and 5 months old. They are still undocumented. They are wonderful students. Some of them I know, and I've given them A's, and they are in tears. They are so frightened about the possibility of losing their status, being deported. All I can say is that we need to work in our communities, but that should not be a substitute for working nationally, because the national government can preempt a lot of what we need to do in our communities. It can, even sanctuary communities, sanctuary cities are in some danger of federal funds being cut off. So we have to work every angle we can. Alexis Parker, do you have any guidance for what we can do to mitigate setbacks to the environment and civil rights under the Trump presidency? Alexis, I'm not going to give you silver linings on this. Trump can very, very easily modify or revoke the executive orders that President Obama has put into place. And those executive orders, whether they are on immigration or on the environment, or even the regulation on the source, energy sources of the environment, that new EPA regulation, he will go after that. There is a lot of damage that a President Trump can do, and that is exactly why we are at the point we are at right now. It's exactly why we have got to create a national organization of the sort that I'm talking about. Why we have got to have an army, a real army, figuratively, not violently, but a figurative army of resistance and reform that all of us have to be involved in. This is the last question. Candace Alternan. Bob, I feel very depressed. I'm sure you do as well. Do you? What are you doing to cope? Candace, I do feel depressed. I feel horrible. I mean, look, I have devoted much of the last 50 years of my life to making this country more progressive. I can't tell you how frustrated I have been in the past. You know, I've worked in government. I've been in the cabinet of Bill Clinton. I was frustrated then for obvious reasons. This, to me, is a huge setback. In fact, in those wee hours of the morning, when I just begin to recognize where we are and what we are, you know, I say to myself, everything that I have tried to accomplish, everything that I've worked with millions of other people to try to do has been just eviscerated, has been just eliminated. But you know something, Candace? Here's where I want you, and where I want hundreds of thousands and millions of people to draw their energy and their courage from. We are not alone. Most people in this country feel like us. Donald Trump was elected with about 25% of the voting population of the United States. And many of them did not vote for hate. Many of them did not vote for Donald Trump. They voted against what they thought was, with some reason, the establishment that was not listening to them, that had not listened to them. A Democratic establishment or Republican establishment, whatever, that has been insensitive to the needs of average people in this country and working people. I mean, you know, despite the efforts of many of us, 2 out of 3 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. You know that the typical wage of the typical American, half of Americans are earning less now than they did in 2000, adjusted for inflation. You know the ranks of the working poor, people who are working full-time but are still in poverty, continue to increase. But the economy is so much bigger. The country and the economy has so much more resources than ever before. Where did they go? Most of them have gone to the top. If you're looking for a fundamental problem, the fundamental problem is the nexus between great wealth at the top and our politics and our democracy. This is what Bernie Sanders was saying. This is why he won 22 states, the most improbable candidate of all. And this is also what people heard. Some people heard from Donald Trump. They heard it. Now, there was a lot of hate, and is a lot of hate. There's a lot of scapegoating. Trump is not the first politician in world history to use economic stresses and channel the anger and that stress into scapegoating. But what gives me courage and what gives me energy is to know how determined so many people are to change our political economic system and make it work once again for all of us. The only good news here, and let me say this again, and I'm going to conclude with this. The only good news is that this is going to cause us all to be politically engaged in ways we have not been called upon to be engaged before. There is no cruising altitude any longer. This country and its place in the world are at stake now. We cannot give up. The fight has just begun. Have a good weekend.